Your brain runs a secret simulation engine every time you zone out. And the network responsible for it is the same one that manifestation accidentally hijacks, except nobody in the self-help world can explain why it actually works, because they don't know it exists. The network has a name. Neuroscientists call it the default mode network. And the gap between what it actually does and what manifestation gurus think they're teaching is where the real science gets useful. Here's what happens when you stop focusing on a task. Most people assume the brain goes quiet, idles, conserves energy like a laptop in sleep mode. Brain imaging tells a completely different story. The moment you stop concentrating on the external world, a specific constellation of brain regions fires up and starts burning almost as much energy as active problem solving, sometimes more. This is the default mode network. It activates when you're daydreaming, reminiscing, imagining future scenarios, or thinking about other people's perspectives. It's your brain's internal simulator running models of possible futures, rehearsing social interactions, constructing narratives about who you are and who you could become. And that last part is where things get strange. Researchers at Washington University first identified this network in 2001 by noticing something nobody expected in brain scans. Participants who were supposed to be resting between tasks showed coordinated activity across brain regions that had no business talking to each other during rest. The medial prefrontal cortex, the posterior cingulate cortex, the angular gyrus, all lighting up together in a synchronized pattern. The brain was doing something deliberate during what everyone assumed was downtime. Decades of research since then have mapped what that something is. The default mode network builds and maintains your self-model, your sense of identity, the running story you tell yourself about who you are, what you value, and what your future looks like. Now place that next to what manifestation practices actually ask you to do. Strip away the crystals and the vision boards and the quantum physics nonsense. The core behavioral instruction in every manifestation technique is identical. Close your eyes, relax your external focus, and vividly simulate a future version of yourself. That's a default mode network activation protocol, almost textbook. A study published in Neuroimage found that when people engage in vivid future self-visualization, the default mode network shows activation patterns nearly indistinguishable from autobiographical memory recall. Your brain processes an imagined future with the same machinery it uses to remember your actual past. The simulation feels real because, to the network running it, the distinction between happened and could happen is blurry at best. So the manifesting crowd stumbled onto a real mechanism. They just wrapped it in the wrong explanation. The question worth asking is sharper than, does manifestation work? It's this: what does repeated default mode simulation actually change in the brain? And does that change produce measurable behavior shifts? The answer takes us somewhere the vision board crowd would rather avoid. Repeated mental simulation of a future self doesn't attract outcomes. It adjusts a filter. Your brain processes roughly 11 million bits of sensory information per second. You consciously perceive about 50. The gap between those numbers is managed by a filtering system that decides what reaches your awareness and what gets deleted before you ever notice it. This filter is shaped by what your brain considers relevant, and relevance is determined in large part by the self-model your default mode network maintains. If that model says, "I'm someone who notices business opportunities," your filter starts flagging patterns in conversations, articles, and situations that a different self-model would discard as noise. A 2015 study from Dartmouth showed that default mode network activity during rest periods predicted which environmental cues participants would notice and respond to in subsequent tasks. The simulation was literally programming the filter for what came next. This is where manifestation gets its hit rate and its failure mode. Visualizing a future self adjusts your perceptual filter. You start noticing opportunities that were always there. You interpret ambiguous social signals more favorably. You take small actions that align with the simulated identity because your brain has already rehearsed them. From the outside, it looks like the universe is responding. From the inside of a brain scanner, your reticular activating system just updated its priority list. The failure mode is equally mechanical. If you simulate a future self but take 0 new actions, the default mode network does something researchers call repetition suppression. The simulation loses neural weight. Run the same movie enough times without real-world feedback, and the brain starts treating it like background noise, the way you stop hearing a refrigerator hum. The visualization becomes wallpaper. This is why people who visualize without acting often report that manifestation stopped working, the network adapted, it downgraded the simulation from possible future to recurring fiction. The default mode network doesn't operate in isolation. It exists in a push-pull relationship with the task-positive network, the brain regions that activate when you're focused on external goals and actions. When one network is highly active, the other typically quiets down. They alternate like breathing. Inhale, exhale, simulate, execute. People who are effective at turning visions into outcomes show something distinctive on brain scans. The boundary between their default mode and task-positive networks is more flexible. They can shift between simulation and execution faster. The handoff is clean. People who get stuck in chronic daydreaming, what psychologists call maladaptive daydreaming, show the opposite pattern. Their default mode network dominates. The task-positive network struggles to interrupt. The simulation runs endlessly, generating vivid futures that feel emotionally satisfying enough to substitute for action. The rehearsal becomes the performance. A clinical research group at the University of Haifa found that maladaptive daydreamers spent an average of 4.5 hours per day in involuntary fantasy. 4.5 hours of default mode network simulation, producing elaborate scenarios that felt emotionally complete. The brain was getting the reward signal from the simulation itself, reducing the drive to pursue the real version. This is the dark side of the mechanism manifestation exploits. The same network that can prime your filter and rehearse future behavior can also satisfy your motivational system enough to prevent you from ever acting. The simulation scratches the itch. So the productive version looks different from what most manifestation advice suggests. Effective mental simulation is brief, specific, and coupled tightly with action. Psychologist Gabriele Oettingen's research on mental contrasting showed that the most effective approach combines positive future visualization with honest identification of obstacles. Simulate the desired outcome, then immediately simulate the specific barriers between here and there. This technique, which she calls WOOP, prevents the default mode network from settling into satisfied replay. It keeps the task-positive network engaged because the brain has been handed a problem to solve, not just a movie to watch. Her studies showed that participants using mental contrasting outperformed pure positive visualizers on almost every metric: effort invested, goals achieved, persistence after setbacks. The difference was consistent across academic, health, and interpersonal goals. The mechanism maps cleanly onto what we know about the network dynamics. Brief, targeted simulation activates the default mode network just long enough to update the self-model and adjust the perceptual filter. Obstacle identification triggers the task-positive network to engage immediately. The handoff happens while motivation is fresh, before repetition suppression kicks in. Think about the last time you had a shower thought that actually led somewhere. You probably weren't trying to visualize. The default mode network activated naturally during the low-focus activity. An idea surfaced. And, critically, you did something with it before the moment passed. Wrote it down. Sent a text. Started a draft. The cycle completed. Simulate. Notice. Act. The people who seem to manifest effectively are running this cycle fast and often short bursts of simulation. Updated perceptual filters. Immediate small actions. The actions generate real-world feedback, which gives the default mode network new data for the next simulation. The loop tightens. Each cycle makes the next one more accurate. Those who sit in visualization sessions for 30 minutes a day, feeling the emotion of an imagined Porsche, are training their brains to enjoy the simulation more than the pursuit. The default mode network gets better at producing satisfying fiction. The filter updates, but without action, the flagged opportunities sail past unopened. The difference between effective internal simulation and expensive daydreaming comes down to one variable: how fast you break the simulation and move. Your brain already runs the machinery that manifestation claims to teach. It runs it every time you stare out a window, every time you zone out in the shower, every time you lie awake thinking about tomorrow. The default mode network builds possible futures automatically. The question was never whether you can simulate a different life. You do it constantly, involuntarily, with breathtaking detail. The question is what happens in the 30 seconds after the simulation ends.